Hi, welcome to the Living Stones podcast. I'm your host. My name is Allison, and today I am joined by Tom. Tom, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name's Tom Rebar. I'm a therapist here with Living Stones Counseling Services. Been here for about a year as a full-time therapist. Before my time here, have served as a pastor. I worked in campus ministry for a number of years, but enjoy being in the clinical space.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining me today. Today we're going to attempt to answer the question, why do I always fall for jerks? Yeah, that's a loaded question. So why do some faith-filled people find themselves stuck in this cycle of falling for jerks?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question. And I'd like to think that I wasn't invited to do this one because I fit the bill. Why do people? No, um, no, so I do. I do think the starting point for this is something of a narrative problem. So our lives in terms of what we hope for, what we think is important for our happiness or for our contentment or fulfillment, which includes what we hope for the future, is informed by the stories that we embrace. And when it comes down to the stories that inform young people about what they're looking for in terms of somebody who's going to be a life partner, who's going to be a special friend, um, Disney has a corner on the market.
Yeah.
And the story that Disney tells is not a story that really matches reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's that story of boy meets girl, their eyes go funny and it's always crazy. It's amazing how animators have that capacity
Oh,
to
yeah.
capture that moment where
Yeah.
everything gets kind of dreamy, even with the animal,
Yes.
like animals in animated Disney. They have got that story perfected. And so we live in a culture where that's some kind of narrative along those lines shapes the longings and the hopes and the expectations. And so it colors it kind of colors or shapes what a young person is looking for
Mm-hmm.
in another person. And all of I think of this is reinforced by our consumer culture looking for a certain look, a certain kind of, and it's superficial. It doesn't have to do with character or qualities or values
Mm-hmm.
and priorities in life. And so I think when young people go into relationships in that way, they find themselves having jumped in looking for something that ends up being disappointing. Another part of that then is, and again, this is part of the narrative, putting the cart before the horse, so that dynamic of wanting to jump right in, moving into that romantic space before doing the hard work of really getting to know. So the getting to know in the Disney version of things, rom-coms and those kinds of things. So the notion of love at first sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, there may be something to that, but oftentimes it circumvents the hard work of getting to know somebody.
Sure. As a therapist, what do you think is the most common misconception about why people go for a partner that treats them poorly?
Yeah, one might be the misconception that I'm drawn to a certain type,
Yeah.
it's almost like it's inevitable, almost like I didn't have any other choice. The second one is the misperception of, well, it's not the person who I thought they were.
Hmm.
The misconception that like I was duped or I was tricked, almost as if I can absolve myself of responsibility because it's this person who was doing the duping or the misrepresenting or.
How does a person's upbringing play a role in making unhealthy or chaotic choices when it
Mhm.
comes to a partner?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think certainly and I think research bears this out, that unhealthy experiences of attachment and comfort, safety, intimacy, trust. When that's unhealthy in early years, those patterns can very easily be replicated. So when a young child has no choice but to attach to an unhealthy caregiver because there's no other choice, it's very easy for that pattern to be replicated in future relationships. There's a diminishing of a sense of self-worth, and I deserve a healthy, loving person as, an important friend or a partner in life.
Yeah. How does this low view of self-worth cause us to go for someone that's just giving us bare minimum?
Yeah, I think it's that sense of, on one hand, I don't deserve it. Sometimes that's the message I think that a child hears when they come out of that unhealthy, unstable circumstance
Yeah.
that has wounded their sense of self-worth, their self-image. And so there's an implicit kind of belief about themselves that I really don't deserve it. And so I'm content with whatever I can get. Sometimes it really is an unhealthy pattern, emotional pattern of how a person attaches and commits, an unhealthy way of sharing intimacy that develops because of never having learned how to have intimate, vulnerable relationships in a way that with a person who I can really trust and who really treats me with dignity and respect.
What are some of the traps or red flags that our desire for a relationship makes us ignore?
Mhm. One of the things that gets ignored are significant deficiencies in terms of character, clear indications of kind of motive, because the feeling of connection for some folks is so strong and they long so much to have, even if it's unhealthy or incomplete, that overrides what to the outside observer might look like, well, can't you see it? The red flag is that minimizing of the significant faults, not the kinds of idiosyncrasies that different people have,
Right.
but significant faults and deficiencies. Or, and this is somewhat similar, but the red flag that looks like, well, I can change that.
Yep.
So that
Yep.
kind of putting off, slowly I can influence or I can change this person.
Yep.
Human beings are wired for intimacy and for
Yep.
connection. And so it's not that the longing is by any means off kilter. What's off kilter is the ways that it's being pursued and what a person ends up thinking is actually going to meet those needs.
What's the difference between true biblical love, which brings peace, and intense chemistry?
Well, so here's the first thing I would say is the intense chemistry is God's creation. So let's just say that's a good part of who we are as human beings, and it serves a purpose. If you think about a human relationship, intimate relationships, friendship as a tapestry, one of the threads of that tapestry is the intense chemistry, that kind of connection that really draws and feels strong. But it's only one of those threads. And it's part of the experiential, so it's part of kind of the subjective experiential piece of being known and knowing another person. Biblical love, as the biblical story presents it, for God's purposes for humankind and God's purposes for partnership and life, is that it's a decision of the will. We associate different feelings with the act of love, but the act of love is a commitment that I make, a decision I make. It's an act of the will. It's crucial, I think, for young people to go into relationships recognizing that and determining to kind of keep the priorities of how relationships can develop in place.
What is a practical, faith-based way that someone can set better boundaries in a relationship early on?
Yeah. So when I think about boundaries, I think about, again, the importance of not putting the cart before the horse. So what comes before romantic relationship, intimacy, of any sort, what comes before that is friendship and the building of friendship. And, I think, again, in our culture, the inclination is to move at the speed of light between meeting someone and moving into the space of, romantic interest.
Yeah.
And you skip over all of the work that needs to be done in terms of building a friendship and really getting to know. So the boundary is the boundaries have to do with I have healthy boundaries that make it possible for me to really get to know this person before I jumped in with both feet. It's a question of saying, as I grow in intimacy, that ought to be matched by my increased knowledge of who a person is.
Yeah.
So that I'm not surprised, taken off guard by I've jumped in with both feet and all of a sudden I'm coming to realize this person is a jerk.
Yeah. Yeah. If someone finds themselves stuck in this cycle of going for jerks, what is one practical next step they could take towards healing?
I think the healthy boundaries in terms of building friendships and healthy intimacy involves doing that in a community, not placing great emphasis on um, dating as individuals, being out where I have to perform and I have to, it's just me and this other person. And so when I find myself in that pattern, one of the first things I think is to step back and to say, let me build a community of friends who I trust will be a safe place to learn to get to know other people.
Yeah.
So even as I think as young people think about dating, to really resist, particularly early on, again, those dates that are individual, so I think about it in terms of a person who might say, well, I'm not going to introduce this person to my friends and my family until I know if they're the one. The way that you kind of discern and get to know somebody, does this person match my my values, my priorities, my vision for life, is to right from the start understand and get to know them in the context of my real world, the people who I trust, the people with whom I share values and priorities and vision for life.
And them too, to know their circle of people.
Exactly.
Do they all think that this person's a jerk too?
Right.
Or can they vouch for them? Is this a really genuine person?
What's the company they keep?
Says a lot. How can a person learn to trust God's timing instead of rushing into a relationship?
How do you trust God?
It's a big question.
Yeah, because entering into a relationship it's a major decision. It's a big decision in life. And I would say this, that it starts with trusting God in little ways. So we are not going to do well trusting God with the big things if we don't practice it in the little things on a day-to-day basis, where I say I'll be best equipped to be able to know and to recognize God's leading and provision, the better I know myself in relationship to God first. So learning to wait on God and trust God is connected with understanding and knowing how to discern God's will and how to discern his leading. And that takes the work of being part of a community, of developing a life of prayer, developing a life of asking the right questions, of carefully honing what are my priorities, what are my values, what's my vision for life, does that line up with Scripture? Because those are the things that God will use to confirm, this is what I have for you. This is my hope for you.
What does it mean to become the right person to stop attracting the wrong people?
Yeah, it seems like that has to do with learning to be confident in myself. So and I think this is particularly for women in our culture, learning how to be confident, courageous, strong as a woman. Before feeling the need as if I have to have a man to complete me.
Right.
that may work for Hollywood. That may work in the Disney universe. That's not God's way of thinking.
Your life doesn't start when you
Yeah,
enter a relationship.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so to really feel like I know who I am
Mm.
and I'm really secure in who I am and I know what I believe and what's important to me. And I can move towards my vision for life and living out my life, knowing that I'm already a complete person. So thinking about relationships as that may be one piece of what God has for me, but it's not the end all. It's not what's going to answer all of my longings.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Tom. That was a great conversation.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, it was.
And thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.